everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Matt Walsh. I'm the founding partner at Castle Island Ventures. Really excited to be speaking with Keone Han from Monad today. And I'll disclose at the outset that I am a big fan of what Keone and team are building, and we're investors at Castle Island. So thanks for doing this today, Keone.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Matt. It's good to be here.
Well, there's a lot to talk about, and I guess we only have 30 minutes to do it. So why don't we just actually start off with a little bit of your background in this industry and what led you to start Monad?
Sure thing. Prior to Monad, I worked in the high frequency trading space for about 10 years as a quant. Spent the last 8 years of my HFT time at a company called Jump Trading, mostly doing futures trading in traditional markets. And then ended up joining the crypto team in 2021, focused on Solana DeFi while I was there. And during my time as part of the crypto team, just realized that there's a huge need for much more performant systems in general. And in particular, the EVM needed a lot of improvements. And there was an opportunity to make EVM execution a lot more performant. So I ended up leaving Jump at the beginning of 2022 and starting Monad along with two other co-founders, including one who was my teammate at Jump for about 8 years.
That's incredible. So maybe just as a general question about Monad, how would you describe sort of what you guys have built versus what it has existed historically in the blockchain space? What are the new innovations that you've brought to bear with this project?
Hmm. Monad is, just to maybe give a really high level overview of Monad. Monad is a new fully bytecode EVM compatible layer one blockchain with over 10,000 TPS of throughput, 1 second block times, and single slot finality. And what that means is that any smart contract that was built for Ethereum or any other EVM compatible blockchain can be redeployed in the Monad environment. And in the new Monad environment, users will be able to transact much more cheaply while interacting with all the same contracts that and libraries and so on that were originally built. Um, and I guess to overview the major aspects that enable this, there are four major improvements. I'll mention them really briefly right now, and then if you're curious, we can talk more about some of the specific details. But the four major improvements are kind of going from the lowest level of the stack to the highest one. A high performance state database that's built from scratch, specifically optimized for storing Merkle tree data efficiently. Number two, optimistic parallel execution, enabling many transactions to be run in parallel, as compared to an Ethereum where transactions are executed one after the other. Number three, deferred execution, where consensus and execution are kind of split and can run in parallel swim lanes to each other. And then number four, a high performance Byzantine fault tolerant consensus mechanism that allows hundreds to thousands of nodes that are globally distributed to all stay in sync with each other.
One of my favorite parts about working in this industry is just looking at the evolution of the technology, right? You look at something like Bitcoin and you say, well, you would have built this a lot differently if some of the underlying technology existed at that time. And when I spend time with you and your team, I really think about the history of Ethereum. And so maybe you could double click into some of the enhancements that you've made and really talking about them in the context of, maybe they weren't possible in the early days of Ethereum and what has really led to this technology actually being possible today.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think when people talk about Ethereum and some of the current congestion issues in Ethereum, it's easy to forget how new of a technology Ethereum is, and then in particular, how new it is to actually have really significant amounts of capital on chain. So Ethereum was, I think, first released in 2015, and then went through a couple of years of iteration and growth of smart contracts. But it really wasn't until DeFi summer in 2020 when the amount of capital on chain massively increased and the amount of usage of the blockchain massively increased. So from 2020 until now, that's not a huge amount of time in the grander scheme of technology development. And, that's one of the reasons why there's still a lot of opportunities to improve the execution system that Ethereum is, and various other aspects of the stack. Um, I think one particular area that I would highlight is the performance of SSDs. So Ethereum nodes, generally speaking, and there are thousands of Ethereum nodes that are all participating in consensus. Almost every single one of them is running with a solid state drive. And one thing to know about SSDs is that they've actually gotten really powerful over the years, and especially recently. They're pretty cheap. So, for example, you can buy a 2 TB high performance 2 TB SSD for about $200, and they have pretty high bandwidth. So you can think of it as like a bottle with a pretty wide bottleneck. Actually, a lot of data can flow in and out of the SSD. However, in order to take advantage of that really high bandwidth, you need software that can, that can appropriately utilize the all the bandwidth that's there. And that means for the specific problem of reading and writing data from the SSD, which is happening all the time as transactions are being processed, you need software that specifically can read and write efficiently, reading and writing many different pieces of the Ethereum Merkle tree in parallel. And for various reasons, like that's really not true in existing Ethereum clients. So one of the most foundational improvements in Monad, although there are a number, is actually this custom state database that much more efficiently utilizes the bandwidth that's in SSDs. But that didn't exist at all to the same degree in 2015. So because of some of these recent improvements, it's become much more clear that this was an opportunity for improvement.
The SSD thing is such an interesting example because, of course, you can build a very highly performant blockchain if only 2 people in the world are using it and they have unlimited resources to go out and procure hardware. But the advancement of SSDs at really a cost that is, I'd say, generally affordable to most people has unlocked this potential. How do you think about what that cost ought to be? I mean, does that influence your design considerations, just the overall cost to participate as a node provider on these networks?
Right. So it's extremely important that anyone be able to run a node, that anyone be able to basically have access to the full shared global state of the blockchain. So when I think about what crypto means, like to me, it means enabling shared global state where we have decentralized control over that state. So, there's like hundreds or thousands of nodes all around the world that are all in sync with each other, all agreeing on the transactions that they're going to execute, and then all executing against the whatever the current state is to advance to the next one. And a lot of the things that get people excited about decentralized apps, like the composability aspect or the transparency or the censorship resistance, like all of those aspects are enabled because we have shared global state and its control over it is decentralized. Like no one party can just mutate state at will. Everything has to follow the rules of the system. So anyway, the point is like anyone should be able to run a node and participate in that and be able to view all of the state that's out there. And that means that we need very minimal hardware requirements for running one of these nodes. With Monad, we've really emphasized two different factors. One is performance. So Monad is, able to process many, many transactions and fully utilize the capabilities of the hardware. But the other part is actually decentralization, aka having very reasonable hardware requirements. And yeah, I just think that that's really important in this day and age when there are many different competing solutions or proposals for directions of how to scale Ethereum. And Monad is very much on the side of decentralization matters a lot. So we need nodes that have or networks that have a large number of nodes. Like it's not okay to just have an environment where there's only one sequencer that controls everything. And so we're really just pushing as hard as we can, both on decentralization and performance.
And you and James come from, I would say, is probably the perfect background being in HFT, really fine tuning some of these systems. So do you see a lot of similarities in what you were doing in the HFT world versus building out this core infrastructure in the blockchain space?
Yeah, I mean, similarities and differences for sure. On the differences side, we were pushing code or repo that 10 people had access to. So very, narrow, very proprietary system development versus in the crypto space, we're writing code that ultimately will be open sourced and will have a much larger number of contributors, which is very exciting. But on the similarity side, for sure, in HFT, the job is to build really performant systems that can take millions of packets coming back from all the exchanges every day and turn decisions around about whether to send an order or not in fractions of a microsecond. So I think it's just good preparation for needing to understand all latencies in the system and also have good intuition for how fast a system could be, which I think is then helpful for guiding, like knowing whether you're on the right track. And when looking at bottlenecks, knowing which of those bottlenecks are ones that can be alleviated through better architecture.
So the next question risks putting you on the spot in terms of just how performant you think this can get. But maybe I'd be curious just around your framing of how do you quantify performance? Is this a transaction per second threshold that matters? A, how do you think about it? And B, what are your early indications of how performant mainnet could be when launched?
Yeah, I think the more precise measure is gas per second. So, for those who don't know, gas is really a measure of computation units in Ethereum. So when someone submits a transaction and that transaction has to go get executed, we just measure like how complex that execution is, like literally how many different, how expensive that execution was, both in terms of like addition or multiplication or things like that, but also how many disk reads did we have to make or how many disk writes did we have to make. And all of that is kind of flattened into this one measure of cost of computation, which I'll call compute units, but officially is called gas. And so like a simple transfer is about 20,000 gas, but like a typical prototypical transaction like a Uniswap swap is about 100,000 gas. And Ethereum is about 1 million gas per second. It's actually 1.25 million gas per second. So Monad is able to process in our current, internal tests right now over 1 billion gas per second. So that's, 1 billion divided by 1.25 million is 800x. So it's substantially more performant than the current constraints of the Ethereum system. And what this means is that at the end of the day, many, many, many more users could utilize this one shared global state and all the applications inside of it relative to what exists right now.
It's really exciting, and probably one of the things that gets me the most excited about it is if you just look at where there is product market fit at the application layer in public blockchains today, and just think about what those use cases would look like on a highly performant EVM system. So take stable coins, take DeFi. It strikes me that this would just be making the user experience a lot better. So I'm curious just how you think about those categories that, maybe we start with the ones that already exist, like stable coins and DeFi, and how you see Monad interfacing with that ecosystem.
Yeah, I think those are two good examples. So talking about stable coins for a second, um, you know, like in order for crypto to be a good form of a good payment rails system for people that are just, going about their day to day, and like needing to send money to relatives or needing to pay someone like for a cup of coffee or a bag of rice or whatever it is, we need the individual cost of each of those transactions to be very minimal so that it's not disruptive. And so for simple transfers right now on Ethereum, that can range from a couple of dollars to like in times of really extreme congestion, like 10 or $20. So in Monad, we expect that those kinds of transactions will be fractions of a cent, therefore much, much, much less disruptive. But the cost is actually really a reflection of supply and demand. In Ethereum, the cost is high because the supply of block space is very low. And so any like amount of demand basically saturates it. I just think that, and it's almost a tired like piece of data to mention at this point because everyone always talks about, you know what I'm going to say, like how many transactions per second Visa processes. But it's just like to think at that scale, tens of thousands of transactions per second. You know, you need a system that can keep up with that. So that's really the first thing, like stablecoins slash payments. Just more generally talking about DeFi. I'm excited about high fidelity DeFi. I'm excited about basically narrowing the gap between, or the cost gap or the execution gap between DeFi systems right now and systems in traditional finance. So like in traditional finance, like when people are trading on a stock exchange, you know, their cost of execution is typically, especially on the most liquid things, very, very small. They end up like, you know, when the width of the spread that they end up crossing is single digit basis points. Whereas in crypto, like we're very used to going and trading on an AMM and experiencing like 1% slippage or 2% slippage. So it's really just narrowing that execution gap between, you know, hundreds of basis points of slippage to single digit basis points of slippage, which I think is possible in an environment where market makers are constantly updating their quotes and competing the spread down. But in order for that to be possible, it needs to be really cheap for those market makers to update their quotes. And again, it just comes back to the same problem of needing high throughput, needing really cheap fees. So I think, you know, from a user experience perspective and also from a scale of adoption perspective, it's very clear that both high fidelity DeFi and stablecoin slash payments are clear areas where we think there could be a lot of traction.
When we talk about the future of the project internally here, we talk a lot about just the history of the internet itself. And you know, if you were raising capital for a startup building on the internet in the late 1990s, you really probably weren't focused on things like, you know, video calling. You probably weren't thinking about hailing Ubers on a smartphone. You weren't thinking about really being connected to the internet itself all day long. And so a lot of these use cases just weren't possible until you had broadband connections and things like that. And so I wonder if in the future, a lot of the use cases for Monad beyond just the core stablecoin and DeFi use cases will probably be these new primitives that don't even exist yet today that are kind of hard to predict because we really haven't had the infrastructure to try any of them yet. I'm curious just how you think about the net new things that could be created for the industry.
For sure. I think that, as you said, it's basically elimination of constraints and elimination of distractions. Like developers shouldn't have to be worrying about optimizing gas. They shouldn't be thinking like, oh, I don't want to like push this data to commit this data to like persistent state because that'll cost me this much gas, which translates to this many dollars for the end user. So it's really just sort of rationalizing the environment to one that's more, you know, much more similar to what would exist in traditional tech. Um, I'll just give you like one really dumb example, which is like if you imagine someone playing RuneScape for an hour, over the course of the hour, they might pick up 50 items. And so if every single one of those items that they pick up costs even like 10 cents to pick up, like to commit to the blockchain, 10 cents times 50 is $5. But people wouldn't pay $5 to play RuneScape for an hour. Like it just economically doesn't make sense. But if you reduce that by 2 orders of magnitude, and now each of those item pickups is a tenth of a cent, now 50 times a tenth of a cent is 5 cents. So it's just much closer to something that, you know, where it's economically rational and whatever other, you know, factors, like whether that's advertising or some other mechanism, like it can actually really make sense for the user, which thus means that developers will end up building that.
Yeah, just ultimately more off-chain logic that can be brought on-chain too in a trusted way that you can actually have settlement assurances and provable notarizations and things like that. So, you know, I wonder if just the surface area for things that you can append to a blockchain and have some of those trust guarantees improves dramatically if you can put lower cost items on chain.
Right.
You know, the next thing I'd love to get your perspective, you must get asked all the time around the future of Ethereum. And there's probably a little bit of a zero sum mentality that some folks have in this industry around this chain is going to win versus this chain is going to lose. So, maybe talk a little bit about Ethereum in the context of being a competitive project, but also potentially a very collaborative ecosystem that you guys will be building in and around.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think of Ethereum at all as a competitor to Monad. And that's not just, from the perspective of like, um, the mouse doesn't think of the gorilla as a competitor because it would be silly. But also just, actually, you know, practically and philosophically speaking, like Ethereum is not a competitor at all to Monad. I think with Monad, our team is really focused on addressing specific problems that we observed, specifically related to scaling execution and addressing these really low level bottlenecks that can only be addressed through low level systems engineering. And our team ended up going in a direction that was pretty different from where a lot of the other teams that were working on scaling research were going in. Like in 2022, a lot of folks were focusing on different roll-up mechanisms or data availability or like other verticals in the Ethereum research ecosystem, which are also very important. But no one is working on this problem of making, rebuilding execution from scratch and introducing parallel execution and introducing parallel access state database. Um, but yeah, I mean, our long-term goal is to help, Monad grow as a vanguard environment for Ethereum and prove what's possible through these low-level optimizations and this relentless focus on enabling shared global state at the speed of light, but then also push some of those improvements back to Ethereum and contribute to the Ethereum research community because we think that at the end of the day, there's more to be gained by collaborating and just like continuing to try to push the limits of what's possible. So it's not, yeah, I mean, Ethereum is always going to be around as the big brother, the bigger sibling, but I hope that our team can contribute meaningfully and that, that'll just be reflected in the fact that there's this new Vanguard environment that can demonstrate what's possible and demonstrate some use cases and over time just continue to push things forward.
Yeah, certainly you've made a bet around the EVM, so it seems like there's a lot of kind of alignment there. And maybe the EVM is a good jumping off point to talk about some of the things that blockchains really need to do well in order to be successful beyond just the technology. These things are, in some ways, they kind of look like religions when they really start to work, where you have this evangelical group of people that are out there really not trying to make money as much as they are just trying to get community built around a shared mission. So, I've always thought Ethereum did a great job with Vitalik leading, that project, basically living on an airplane in the early days, just teaching people about Ethereum. So,
Mm.
how have you thought about building community, and maybe what are some of the lessons from other projects that are leverageable in that side of things?
Yeah, I do think that crypto is really unique in the strength of the community and the power of the community to be basically evangelists for the technology. When you're building a product in the traditional tech space, and you post updates on your Twitter, like, two people will end up liking these updates, and it's like your mom and your your mom's dog's Twitter account. So, yeah, I just think the amount of support that any project in the crypto space, but especially Monad has gotten from the community, like that level of support is just really invigorating and just a reminder that what all of us are doing when we're working in the space is really special and is a secret weapon that we should use to help push decentralized tech to take over the world. Um, we're I guess like just right now there's news about or rumors about the ETF approval, the Ethereum ETF approval in the US. Like, if that happens, that is a result of the will of the people. And so I think that there's incredible power that comes with community. And for me as a leader in our team, like I just feel really privileged to have for our team to have the support of the community.
It's and you guys have done a great job of getting very active on whether it be Discord or the social channels. What is it that you're trying to convey to that community now? Is it just education around how the project works, or really where are people engaging, and where are you finding that you and the team are spending significant time with that community?
Um, it's a couple of things. I mean, one is definitely around education, around the importance of both performance and decentralization, and the importance of efforts that can deliver performance without um, giving up on decentralization. So like, some of our core mission aspects. But I think the other part is just having fun and like just, making friends, like especially, in the context of Monad, like we got started in 2022. A lot of our early community members were with us through a pretty brutal bear market, and we're just kind of like hanging out together and commiserating and making friends. So I think that's really important because now, as Monad approaches mainnet and there's the, likelihood of many projects launching, whether they be applications or NFT projects or what have you, there's already this loyal community base that's very much going to be on the in pole position to like be active community members of new projects, but then also many are starting their own projects as well, and gaining new skills in the process. So I think it's just, yeah, the communication is not only about specifically the technology, but it's also just about like our friendship and our lore and all of the funny things that have happened over the past 2 years that make the community really special.
I mean, I guess you really know who's going to stick by you in some of these bear markets, right? So the past 2 years post FTX has been some of the most trying times for a lot of people building. So a real sign of a healthy community is that people stick around and people build through this. So it sounds like you guys have done a great job on that front.
Thanks. Yeah.
And so it looks like we're almost at our time here, Keone. So what's the best way for people to learn more about the project, stay in touch, and get involved in this community that we're talking about?
Yeah, I think the best way is just to check us out on Twitter. We're monad_XYZ on Twitter. And then there's links from that to all other sorts of different social media, Twitter spaces that we do. We do Twitter spaces every day in a different form, a lot of other things like that.
That's awesome. Well, thanks so much for doing this. I'm super excited about what you guys are building and really looking forward to seeing what the next year holds for you guys.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.